All right, ready for some questions, panel? All right, there we go. First one off. As organizations grow, it's easy to keep adding programs. If you had to audit your current culture initiative today, what is one sign that you're trying to do too much?
Yeah, I can take that. I'll be my lens will be as a consultant coach here. A lot of times what I will pick up on or we'll pick up on is that when things feel like they're a chore, like, oh, we need to do this thing. Oh, we have to have this event. And you can see that that's not really how you want to see things, right? When you have a program out there, you want to be excited about that. You want to understand where it's connecting and what the end state is and what it's driving. So whether that's linking back to your culture or the performance or your values or whatever that is, you really want to see the excitement. And when I see drag or, oh my goodness, one more thing, then you really have to question, what is the impact of that particular program? Is it really doing what you need to do? And sometimes I'll ask the question, if we were to stop this tomorrow, would anybody even notice? Would they have relief? What would the response be? Right. And so again, kind of what we were saying before about, the metrics and everything that we're looking at from the poll is, maybe it's time to stop that, or maybe it's time to adjust it, or maybe it's time to pause it. Maybe it's wrong timing. Maybe we're not there yet in the process. So I would just say that, when you see that kind of friction and that kind of pause, and that things look like they're a chore, take a moment, pause, don't take it personal. Let's reassess. What are we really getting out of this? Is it intentional? And are we getting what we need out of it? Does it need to change? Does it need to evolve? Does it need to end?
I love that, Jay. And I can pipe in. I think, in addition to what you mentioned, if your people have to ask you how to recognize someone or where to recognize someone, there's something wrong. And I don't mean that just from like a recognition program perspective, but from the perspective of, do people have the toolkits on what recognition means to your organization, why we recognize, what warrants to be recognized, different ways to recognize people? There's so many different ways to recognize people, whether that's large scale organizational program or that's a shout out on your team meeting. But if your people don't know how to do that or where to start, that's, I think, how you know that you might be doing a little too much or maybe not enough.
And I'll add to both of your thoughts, which is just like you kind of talked a little bit about it, but like, do you feel like your team has a clear, like, stop doing muscle? Like, is that embedded in your regular operations and like your audits and your, whatever it is, quarterly or yearly, audits, reviews? And if you feel like your culture is really just like a calendar driven or like a checklist driven culture, as opposed to more of a value driven culture, that I think is an indication for maybe you guys are doing too much. And I would also just be like, hey, what are the vibes? Like, is there like manager fatigue? What does that look like? Yeah, just get a like a pulse of your team from like energetically how you feel.
Love it. Yeah, I think it's a really good point. It's like you might have the vision of what the program looks like and how people utilize it. And if you're not reaching out to various team leaders or even just like employees who are just started with your organization, you might have one vision of what that program looks like, but at the same time, somebody down the chain has a completely different vision. Maybe it's just a checklist type of item for them where you envision it as a much bigger part of their life. So it is always nice to do that audit, reach out to the team, see what they're thinking, to find that balance for sure.
Yeah, I think, Shauna, sorry if I could just jump in on
Yeah.
that. I mean, I think it's really easy, especially at the executive level to ideate in that executive room and sometimes have these wonderful ideas, and then you don't realize the potential chaos and unintended consequences and things that they can have as you're going down. So as you are in that planning, I would definitely encourage people to bring other individuals throughout the organization to be a part of that broader discussion so that you can see what that impact would be when it gets to the front line or throughout your organization so that you can identify that up front.
Exactly. Love it. Awesome. Kind of brings us naturally to the next question. Looking back, what is an example of a program or initiative that seemed like a great idea at the time, but didn't scale the way you expected? And then what would you do differently if you were designing it today?
I can jump in on that one. So in my past life, we created a values award program where people within the organization would submit nominations to nominate those who are living the values. What ended up happening with that was we kept seeing the same people winning, and it kind of became a popularity contest. And oftentimes, those that continued to win were those that ended up having kind of the loudest voices within the organization. So, yes, there was some recognition that it did accomplish, but it did not accomplish those that were living the values more quietly. And those people matter too. And I think this goes on to the topic of recognition has to be inclusive. And if I could go back in time and do something different, I think there should be a better pulse check on how people within the organization like to be recognized. There's some people who want the big organizational shout out and the cash and the trophy. There's some people who actually just want you to say good job in a one-on-one. There's some people who want a shout out on a Slack channel, and everyone is different. Recognition isn't doing what it's supposed to do if not everybody feels seen within it. And so I think taking a more inclusive lens the next go round would be really critical.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I lived that. So prior to this, my career was leading sales teams, and everybody always thinks sales people are these extroverted, you love those big sales kickoffs, laser light shows, whatever. And that's not true. You have all different types of behaviors and personalities through a sales team. And so one of the things that we try to do is be really intentional about understanding how people wanted to be rewarded. And I didn't really click into that until a few years into leading these teams because I kind of had the same bias myself, that everybody kind of had this drive personality. And I think, if I could rewind things back, I wish I would have kind of recognized that earlier because when we were more intentional about things, it got a lot better when it came to reward and recognition. We were able to personalize them. Now, as a consultant, one of the things that we do, I think, we try to install within organizations are what you probably recognize is called a me card. Everybody in the organization talks about like, themselves, and how they like to be recognized, how they like to be rewarded. What is their bucket list items, right? And things like that, so that you can be really intentional about how you're individualizing those rewards and recognition opportunities. And then also, what's really critical that I think has been a miss in situations that I've been in is not having that leadership buy-in and modeling from the top down. We'll put a program in place, and it's almost like a band-aid. We need to recognize and reward our people. The band-aid goes on, and then Jasmine, what you're talking about, it becomes that popularity contest or people are left behind, right? So I'll go back to the example of sales. Big sale happens, everybody knows about it, they're getting all this accolades, but there's an army behind these people, right, that help make that successful, and they're often forgotten. So I think it's important that you have that leadership buy-in, that they're modeling and that it's flowing through the organization naturally. But yes, it's intentional, it's inclusive, and it's really thinking about that individual person.
I'll just chime in with a few last thoughts on this question, but we, had in terms of like our reward and recognition, and one of the things that we did to not like harp on some of the other ideas that were brought up, but to actually like provide something a little bit different is that we gave budgets to different teams for them to actually go and be with one another, and budgets that were assigned to them to go and put together their own team building experiences, which is one of our forms of reward and recognition that we practice naturally here at Confetti. And, when I compare it to some of the other companies and, what they're doing, wrong when it comes to that is like, there really isn't an easy button when it comes to putting those things together. So like people don't know where to go to. People don't know what budget to use. They like make them jump through like a million hoops to get there. And I think, one thing that we practiced at Confetti that helped also hold managers accountable is that culture and reward and recognition. This is part of your this is part of your performance review. It is a requirement for us to make sure that managers are doing it. So HR is one of the folks that hold these managers accountable towards making sure that the managers are following up with utilizing their budget and like doing, the things that we have as part of our tradition within Confetti for reward and recognition.
Mhm.
Love it. Yeah, it's kind of figuring out that adaptability, finding out what the teams want to do and how they recognize, and kind of figure out at the individual level, how do you want to recognize your team as a manager and what's your manager style, and giving them the resources and the time to recognize their team, like you were saying, Lee. Which kind of lovely blends into our next question. How do you balance a company-wide initiative program that while allowing each team to have their unique culture and how it comes through? So Lee,
Um,
I'll get you to kick off on that
yeah.
one. Continue the
Okay, guys.
conversation on it. Yeah.
I think it's really important for every like company to just really like sit and think about what their cultural spine is, kind of what I like to call it. So what are the values? What are the events? Like you guys know your team, your culture the best. So just like utilizing that and realizing how do we make this a custom program that leads to the highest level of engagement. And something that I at least talk about a lot with companies is a lot of companies put a lot of the reward and recognition efforts as like a company-wide, I say, initiative. But I think it's really important for teams to have the right tools and resources to make sure that they're set up for success, because I believe that teams is the most important culture that you actually have within the organization. It's the 5, 10 people that you work very closely with in and out and your day to day. There's a lot of research and stat that support whether you stay or leave. It's because of your team. It's because of your manager. It's not necessarily because of your company. So, kind of alluding to what I said earlier, set your teams up for success. Like give them budget. Make sure that they know how to take ownership of their culture on their own. And this doesn't necessarily need to be like forcing them to do certain things, although I think that to some extent that could be appropriate in certain situations. It's really about giving them freedom, what I like to call freedom within a framework, right? So choosing the how they do the reward and recognition for their team, not whether they participate, and making sure you really push that ownership locally and not, centrally, and just avoiding this one size fits all solution.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Lee. I think, for us, the reason why we start clear with C is because culture, right? And one of the things that we talk about is that culture isn't just, what the organization has painted on their walls, the mission vision, all of that. An individual team has its own culture. And so being able to personalize that reward and recognition within that particular team is something that's important for the leaders to understand. And what you talked about, Lee, about having that framework of how they can do it, but personalize it to their team. And they can also share across teams, right? I know one team that I thought was super creative. They had what they called the Duck Award. And when I first heard that, I was like, what in the world is the Duck Award? And they explained to me like, well, when a duck, they look so calm, but their legs are going like this under the water and you can't see all of that. But for that particular team, it was outward facing, community facing. And so they didn't want people, there's chaos within the organization, but they wanted people to be able to see calm, we've got it, right? And so that's what they did. They ended up sharing it across the wider organization. So I think it also sparks a lot of creativity. When you have these things at the team level, when you can cross-pollinate those ideas, it allows that transfer of creativity across different teams. But the fact of the matter is that whatever you have on your wall, and as proud you are of that as an organization, and I've seen executive teams spend so much time and pay lots of money to have you have this culture, cultural statement. You need to have that. That's important. But I think they also often miss sight of the fact that the individual teams will have their own culture as well. And it's important to make sure that they're empowered to be able to manage within that and also reward and recognize within their team culture as well. So one size cannot fit all, Lee, like Lee said.
I mean, do I need to say anything else? I think I think Lee and Jay covered it perfectly. And I love Lee, the way you posed it as the cultural spine. Yes, I couldn't agree more. And I think, the organization sets the guardrails. They set the why and the how. As far as, if we think about it like from a budget perspective, or if we think about it from, you know, certain cultural nuances on how people should be recognized, but it's really up to the managers who personalize it. It's the managers who make it real every day. It's the managers who get to make it actually stick and really are like on the ground and make people feel seen and heard. And I think the why looks different, right? At an organizational level, the why is we want people to be recognized because XYZ, whether that's we want people to be more motivated, we want to increase our retention rates, we want to um, increase the tenure times of how long people are staying at the organization before they go. We want to empower people, whatever that case is. And then the manager, that cascades to the manager, and they say, okay, how can I make this relevant to my team? And how, knowing my team, can I make this feel personal? Because managers should know their people. And I think that's a big miss that we have. And I think Jay and Lee have both alluded to this, is that as a manager, your job is not to just check the box and check people's work. Your responsibility as a manager is to develop your people, get to know your people, know the why, the how they want to be recognized, how they like to be seen, how they like to receive feedback. And so by you really having a pulse on your team, you can drive different ways to recognize that actually resonate to your people. If you're not creating something that resonates to your people, you are missing the mark completely.
Yeah. Sorry, Jasmine, I think something that's also really important with that is we know that teams that feel like they're included, they're seen, that they belong, perform better. And what
Absolutely.
you and Lee described is ways of being able to get that inclusive culture within that team and that organization so that people truly feel like truly belong, not just feel like they belong, but they belong and they are able to perform better because they have that manager has that freedom to be able to do what they know they're individuals, let them come
Exactly.
together.
Love it. I like your duck award type of idea as well, because it just allows even managers to see what other managers are doing, to see what works well for the company, but also kind of learn what could be used and get a little bit of that creative thinking of what they could bring to their own team as well. Love it. Awesome. So we've talked about a lot of like what you could do, but in reality, sometimes resources are limited. So when we're working with teams that have limited resources, what are some tried and true ways to increase engagement? And Jasmine, I feel like you kind of started kickstarting this conversation in the last question. So yeah, over to you.
Sure. You know what? You're going to hear me talk about inclusivity all the time because people are motivated by different things. There's some of us who are motivated by money. There's some of us that are motivated by mentorship, sponsorship, exposure. And so when we think about recognition, there's a million ways to be creative without funds. And that could look like having an opportunity to sit in an executive team meeting. That could be having an executive team member or even just someone more senior than you be your mentorship within the organization. That could be attending a lunch and learn that's specific to a certain population within the organization that you wouldn't typically be in that room. And so I think we have to really take a step back and say, like, what are we trying to accomplish here? Are we trying to give people money? Because if that's the case, let's give people money all day. Oprah, you get a car, you get a car.
Right.
But if the goal here is to give people growth opportunity so that they're seen and heard, we got to take a step back and say, how can we do that? And there's a million ways we could do that. And I think organizations really need to think outside the box, again, knowing your people and knowing your culture to figure out ways to do that. But I know for me in the past, just getting that exposure, getting that mentorship, getting that sponsorship, having the opportunity to hear about things within the business that you typically wouldn't hear about can literally make somebody's job 20 times better because now they have information they typically wouldn't be exposed to, which again only highlights their work even more. So it's a full
Hmm.
circle.
Hmm. Yeah. I'm gonna link back to sort of that me card concept, right? Like if you really understand what people want to do, what do they want to achieve, whether personally or professionally, if you can link back to that, you don't have to have a big budget. I mean, I've worked with Fortune 500 and I've worked with scrappy startups. And those scrappy startups tend to be really, really creative because they're on lean budgets. And Jasmine, like the examples that you talked about, having an opportunity to sit down and have a coffee, and leaders who think, well, that's that going to take a lot of my time. Like your mindset's wrong in that situation, right? We need to talk about leadership at that point because that one coffee with that individual, if that's on their bucket list, is something that can really, really help amplify, who they are and the performance and their dreams and goals and everything else. So maybe it's just a coffee for you, but it's something golden for them, right? So, I think just we don't always have to construct these big programs within an organization. It can be very, very simple, very scrappy, doesn't take a lot of budget or any budget at all to do some of the things that you talked about, and it can go a long way.
I love this topic in general. I built a whole new business unit over the idea of like very low cost and very affordable ways to create recognition engagement. And my biggest thought is that like manager effectiveness is we've talked about this a few times already, but like that has the highest ROI and like is the highest ROI lever for like change, right? Like when your manager comes and pulls you aside and tells you like, hey, you did a great job, like that feeling goes so much further than probably like even like the 10 most amazing programs that are available today. So like really thinking about how do managers start to instill rituals, which is what a word that I like to call it, like whether it's like the daily stand up or the weekly stand up, like really start being like, it just doesn't have to be this grandiose event. Let's take the things that we're already doing. And in the first 2 minutes, just being like, hey, I want to give people shout outs or somebody says something like go ahead and compliment them right then and there publicly in front of their team members. The rituals is, and I'm coming from like an events background and a team building background and all that. In many cases, the rituals is even more important than these like one-off events. And we've already said it, but like recognition doesn't require a budget. Nonetheless, I'm going to drop a link in the chat with just a couple of free samples of like things that we have that can boost recognition today that you can cruise through, play with, and do with your team. It's completely free. So hopefully that's a little helpful for y'all.
Love it. And I think it almost harkens back to Megan's question in the chat when just doesn't when there's manager fatigue and they feel so busy that they can't connect with their team. I think there's opportunities like that to kind of bring in a recognition and start to connect with your team that way. So you're kind of able to connect and kind of recognize somebody for their contributions within your team, but also like it's not an extra task on your list to check off. It's kind of a natural way to bring in that cohesion, we recognize you, we see you, have that small conversation as well. So I think we've kind of covered both the monetary side of, you can do a lot with no budget, but also, your time is also valuable. And how do you kind of bring in that recognition and loop it into a group conversation, get to know your team, and just make sure that you're consciously recognizing your team, weekly and shouting
Well,
out for the small things. Yeah.
Sean, one thing with that too is sometimes we think of these things as additive to the normal day. And Leah, I like what you're talking about, the rituals and like the flow, because as a leader, you're probably having one-on-ones, you're having your team staff meetings, you're doing these things where you have these touch points. So where does it flow into that naturally? One of the things that we try to do when we're working with leaders is 50-50, or 60-40 or whatever. But 50% of the time, yeah, you're asking business things, you're getting the updates that you need and giving direction or whatever that is. And then the other 50% can be talking about them, whether it's their career or whatever that is, or that opportunity to give them that recognition piece. It doesn't have to be additive. You can look at your normal flow in a day, the amount of touch points that we have, is pretty incredible, particularly since we've gone, a lot of teams are remote, a lot of things are like this, right? And so we're having these touch points, but I think we get into managing versus leading. And so we put the manager hat on and we're just checking things off and we're hoping maybe we can get 15 minutes back and things like that. Well, just maximize the time that you do have. And I think when you sit down and you map out how many touch points you do have with people within your organization or people within your team, you're going to see that it's quite a bit. Just reframe a little bit, work it into that so that it becomes a habit, it's natural, and then it's repetitive and it's built into your culture.
Also just at the end of this webinar, I really like use that as a moment. Maybe we, find ourselves with 30 seconds to spare. Think about that one colleague this week or last week that impacted you positively and just shoot them a note. And it makes everybody feel good. You know the feeling because when you get it yourself, like you know how good that feels. And just shoot that person a note and start making that like a tradition, within your team.
I love that.
Yeah.
Such a great idea.
So one of the things that we do on our one-on-ones is not dive right into the topics or like what you're doing for work. It's just like, how was your weekend? What's your day like? Jay, you've got two cats. What chaos have they done? Stuff like that. It's like, I think it just kind of breaks the mentality of it's always work, work, work related and gives you that opportunity to compliment and learn about your team and have that human to human connection.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Love it.
think that's something that we need to remember is that we're all humans at the end of the day, and
Mm-hmm.
we're all going through something and we don't know it. And so you just don't know what's happening in people's lives. You don't know what they're going through. And the fact that they're still showing up at work and they're doing something that warrants recognition, yeah, recognize them. And at the
Mm-hmm.
end of the day, to your point, especially when we think about like one-on-ones, ask your people how they're doing. How are you doing? And not the superficial, how are you doing? Good, great, next. No, like how are you really doing today? That matters. It really does. And I think that goes back to your point, Jay, the difference between a manager and a leader.
Mm-hmm.
Great point. Love it. Yeah. One last story before we get into the next question. Yeah, I had a very British, proper from Britain type of manager, and we don't do compliments too well to each other, but we did that one day. It's just like complimented each other a couple times, turned beet red. It was great. But it was a great bonding moment, and we all laugh about it. So I'm gonna kind of pick some of our remaining questions because I think we might be running quick if we were trying to do everything. I'd love to hear from the team when you've simplified a program or an approach, what did that look like in practice and what changed as a result?
Well, I'll say, the communication and explaining the why. So when you have to change something, people are going to notice. There's going to be all kinds of emotions. There are going to be some people, when you do make a decision to stop a program, there's going to be a handful of people that loved it, right? I mean, so you're going to get a wide variety of things. And one of the things that, not even just talking about reward and recognition piece, but people just want to know the why, right? Like Jasmine was saying, we're all human beings. We're being asked to do different things. We're willing to work hard. We're willing to pivot. We're willing to do all this stuff, right? But we want to understand the why. And so I think one of the important things to do is when you simplify your approach or you need to make an adjustment or whatever, is just really think through that communication plan and why you're changing it. Maybe it's not because it's broken. Maybe it's just not the right time. Maybe it wasn't the right fit. Maybe it just didn't hit right, right? So but if you can explain it to people and be transparent, I think people really appreciate transparency, authenticity. We talk about it all the time when we're talking about leadership development, but I see it not really happen all the time, right? When I'm working in these situations. And I think that there's a fear there, but if people can just understand, we're going to make a change. Here's why. Here's why we're asking you to do this or do something differently. It goes a long way.
I think we should just reframe that like letting go is just it's a natural and amazing part of leadership. It's not a loss. It's just um, the natural evolution of it. So I think we should, yeah, do that.
And I can just add, when I think about simplifying, there's less friction to be recognized. There's clear pathways to be recognized. There's more flexibility in recognition, which is a really big one. Flexibility is big because sometimes we think in this like rigid way that recognition has to look like this, and it can look like a million things, like what we've talked about today. But the outcome of that is, to your point, Jay, more authenticity, more authentic recognition that actually aligns to the culture of the organization, who you are, which is really what matters.
Yeah. What are you linking it back to?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and something that our development team does when there's kind of like an incident, and this is kind of like a what all teams do in that scenario is kind of have a no faults, no blame type of like retrospective of, okay, what happened, what went wrong, how could have we prevented that, what are those next steps, and it could have been something that one of the team members was working on hard, very hard to kind of like make it a great feature in the platform, and there's that ease of conversation of like, yeah, like let's just kind of drop the ownership of this idea, the guardrails that might pop up along with that mentality, and just kind of start to talk about it holistically and what are the best practices. And we see that a lot with companies starting to like onboard into our platform is, we see that kind of pivot as well. If you start to think your rewards and recognition program could be one thing, and that's how you've kind of pitched it to the CEO and got the seal of approval to go ahead. But then as you learn, you start to have those conversations with your team, you get to kind of step back and start to say, oh, okay, this is how I want to kind of like really tackle this program to kind of make it more successful. And I think the teams that realize that and kind of pivot really do well. And then those who kind of just say, this is my program and I'm going to delete every recognition that doesn't follow my guidelines, those are the ones that kind of struggle to get off the ground as well. Love it. Okay. So we had it in our poll and question about kind of like how you're feeling. But for anybody who's listening, who feel like they're doing too much, and not seeing the impact that they want, what's one thing that they should stop, start, or simplify over the next 30 days?
I
You want
go,
us to answer? Okay, I was like, I
oh,
thought you.
oh, it's for us, right? Is it for
Yes,
us?
Yeah.
yes, yes. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Harken
There
back
was
to the
another poll,
question.
and I was
Yeah,
like,
Yeah,
yeah.
I did the poll. Yeah, I was like, wait, it was a poll. Wait, okay.
I
Also, chat,
deleted the
go for
poll.
it.
I don't know.
Yeah.
There's no poll.
Yeah.
Um, I was just going to quickly say success metrics is it's real. And I think Jay, you had mentioned this at the beginning of when you're thinking about recognition, regardless if it's something big or something that's more individualized, you've got to ask yourself the why. Like, why is this happening? What are the success metrics that will tell me that this was successful? Is it doing what it's supposed to be doing? That matters because otherwise it just becomes performative and now you're just recognizing people, but you're not actually moving the needle forward and what it was meant to do. And when that happens, it's like, what are we doing? So I would say start asking the why, start putting success metrics to define how do I know if this is working? And always ask yourself, is this doing what it's supposed to be doing?
Yeah.
think my comment piggybacks off of that pretty naturally. So like I know we're many of us have businesses and we want you guys to look at them and we want you guys to buy them, but actually my weird contrarian advice is just maybe we stop launching anything new for just the next 30 days and let's just create that space by pausing and as Jasmine was saying, like, let's observe and reflect and start doing like a simple audit. Go directly to your managers, which I think is like one of the most important things that you can do to really get a pulse of, how everybody's feeling because they're very close to the day-to-day vibes of their team, their department. And ask yourself, like, what's one people program or one ritual or one process that just feels like effort and that it doesn't create real value for the team. And then I always like to be like, okay, why? Because like maybe that's something that can be solved pretty easily and start looking for patterns. And then my thing that I'll like end with is just like from there you can start to simplify it, whether that's removing that entire initiative altogether, or you start thinking and picking your highest impact program and make it really simple for your team to do that thing, right? Maybe you can look at it, say like, how can we do this with half the steps or half the complexity or clearer intent? Because people are so busy and like we want to believe that they read the SOPs and the like large documentations that are super detailed that answer every question and all the things. So like we're like, no, we need something that's really, really simple for managers to do.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I would definitely say keep it on the simple side, right? I mean, one thing that I'm sure we're all experiencing and that we all see is that, I mean, how long have we been talking about let's do more with less? I think for my entire career, I've been hearing that phrase, and like we've cut into the bone at this point. So we don't have a lot of time. So I think keeping things simple is really important. And of course, one of the things that we always look at is employee engagement and ways to engage them intentionally. I think there was a comment in the chat that said something about, what if you're the owner, but you don't have authority and you have this program and everything else, and the leaders aren't bought in, right? Well, to me, it's a small village that really makes some of these programs live and breathe or evolve. And so I would look for those opportunities to efficiently bring a small team together. To assess the things that you're doing, like what Lee was talking about, do that assessment, and also make sure, like, have some questions prepared. Is this linking back to my culture? What is the point of this program? What is it that is intended to drive? And if you can answer those three questions well, then okay, maybe you stay the course. If you're really struggling with that, then it's that opportunity to say, why don't we pause this? Are we overloaded right now? Is the juice really worth the squeeze right now? Do we need something else, right? So I think, I don't want to say a SWAT session because that's going to scare everybody to death, because those things last for a day or so or more. So it doesn't need to be anything like that complex, but just having a couple of those questions framed, sit down with a cross-function team at different levels of the organization so they can inform from their viewpoint, get into a room for an hour and ask those questions. And then that'll help guide you where you need to go after you've answered those questions.
Love it. Yeah, I think I think it was Lee that kind of was like, do you really need to add more complexity to a program? And sometimes it's never gonna like it might not be the fix. It might just be kind of more of that checklist of now I have to do this. Okay, like let's do that. And you don't build up engagement and kind of just that natural recognition or cohesion amongst the team. And yeah, thinking back to a bunch of companies we've worked with, there's sometimes some departments that wildly use our program in a different way that either naturally builds that momentum, like people see, leaders recognizing other individuals. A new manager might learn how to recognize through that actions as well. But then there's sometimes that opportunity to kind of like split up the program a bit more and allow people to recognize in their own ways. Love it. Real. Let's see if there's any questions in the chat. I saw something about how would you recommend how are you really doing with folks who don't want to share their personal life at work? Sometimes you've got individuals that are quiet on that side.
Oh yeah.
And that's okay. And
Yeah.
and that's a-okay. And what I actually just wrote in the chat to that question is, sometimes, and this is going, and I love the leader versus manager depiction because a leader leans in to build trust. And maybe the person doesn't want to talk about their personal life, and that is totally okay. But just how can you meet the person where they are and build some type of bond with them? They eventually will open up to you in whatever way they feel most comfortable. And that's where that's like that sweet spot of when you can really influence. And so I would say continue to lean in, continue to build trust, be genuine in your interactions, not performative, and eventually you are able to make some type of connection. You just kind of have to know how to meet the person where they are.
I think that might be a good way to end this segment.